Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have Steve Parr with us. Steve is the founder and the lawyer at Parr Business Law, his own law firm. So they do corporate and estate planning services, including corporations, reorganizations, tax rollovers, business contracts of all varieties, family trusts, wills, power of attorneys, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to talk about law and AI because I have my law GPT nowadays. I don't hire lawyers anymore, but I still know that there's very smart lawyers out there like Steve that are adapting. So eager to
Mhm.
jump right into it. But before we do, this podcast is presented by bookridegpt.com. If you want to take your LinkedIn content and convert it into a nice AI written book that can be published on Kindle, go to bookridegpt.com. I have a free credit for you. Steve, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Thanks, Charles. It's great to be on the pod. Appreciate the invitation. And yeah, so I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia. And what am I up to these days? Running my firm, building community, playing a lot of hockey, doing all the things that I love. And yeah, and as a lawyer, definitely spending a lot of time adapting to this AI world and seeing where it's going to go and seeing how I can continue to add value to my clients. Um, so a lot of my lawyer colleagues like definitely have a lot of anxiety about, you know, what are we going to be out of work? Is it going to take out legal work? Is it going to take out paralegals? What does the future of our industry look like? And I know a lot of different industries are grappling with the same questions. So we're not alone in that. But I think it's just a very exciting time, really, because AI is just going to allow us to do less of what we don't want to do and focus on the things that really matter.
Right. Well, let's start dissecting your career here, and specifically when you started your own law firm. I believe that was almost 10 years ago. What prompted you to make that move? And yeah, has it been hard to have your own law firm, or has it been something that is natural and feels easy to you?
Bit of both, I'd say. Yeah, the timeline's about right. Yeah, I started around 10 years ago, and I had begun my practice basically straight out of articling, which is the process of qualifying to become a lawyer. Uh, I started another business. I was managing vacation rental properties in Vancouver and in Whistler. Did that for a few years, and then sold that business. And then by then, I was hooked on entrepreneurship. I knew that I couldn't go back to being an employee, and I needed to be able to call the shots in terms of what kind of clients I was working with, what kind of work I wanted to do, and what hours and from where I wanted to do it. So just having those kinds of freedoms was really important to me, and of course still is. So in that sense, it did actually feel pretty natural. I didn't have a lot of the fear and resistance that I think a lot of lawyers and other professionals do when they first start their practice. And I had a bit of money from the previous business that I had been operating, so I had a bit of a cushion there, which I think is really important. A lot of people talk about this concept of burning the boats, when they first start the business. And I don't think that's the best way to go because it's terrifying. There's enough anxiety that is going to come about when you start a new thing. So it's good to be to be able to support yourself and not be worrying incessantly about when the first client is going to come through the door. So it's been a lot of fun, Charles. I've really enjoyed being an entrepreneur, and there's no other way for me. I'd be a terrible employee.
The burn the boats analogy is it's kind of interesting. I think the best attribution of it was Hernand Cortes that colonized Mexico through
Mm,
Veracruz. Apparently, he
yeah.
did burn them that way, but I think that the most valid analogies to burning the boats were um, all these yet to be colonizers, some of them from UK and Ireland. In these boats, there were a bunch of sick peoples, right? And they were just good for nothing. These boats, if you would come back to the boat or stay in the comfort of the boat, you would just rot and die in
Right.
6 months. While if you would try to swim to the shore, you might die. Some of them didn't even know how to swim, but if you made it, you sort of made it. So
Wow.
yes, there's an extreme period of adaptation. And I'm looking at your background while saying this. The waves look pretty gnarly behind you. But how has that been for you? Have you gone through some extreme stress when you started your business? What were the challenges to lift your own law firm up the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely did go through a lot of stress. I mean, because was taking on everything all at once. I was taking on the practice of learning how to be a lawyer, how to be a professional, and how to start a business. Those are two different things. And I didn't really realize that or fully appreciate how hard that would be. Um, so yeah, that was definitely really challenging, and it took me years to start to feel comfortable and start to feel the ground underneath my feet. And yeah, and along the way, I made some mistakes. I made mistakes as a business owner, and things that cost me a lot of money. A lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of stress. And you can't, I mean, I think it's kind of impossible to predict all of these things, Like you can invest in mentorship and surround yourself by smart people, but inevitably if you're drawn to being an entrepreneur, it's because you have that instinct to figure things out on your own and make your own mistakes, which is
Right.
suboptimal, but it's the way it is, right?
Right, but you are well protected as a lawyer, right? When is it ethical to sue someone as a lawyer, knowing that you'll win? That most people are not like well informed. Let's say that you hire a coach, right, and he sort
Mm,
of screwed you.
yeah.
Do you just let it go, or do you just bring them to court straight up and destroy them?
I mean, that's interesting. Like, I think that's a bit of a misconception. Simply because you're a lawyer doesn't mean that you have this incredible power to just breeze through the courts and bring about any kind of resolution that you want. Going through the court process is a huge pain in the ass, whether you're a lawyer or whether you're not, and it takes forever. In British Columbia, the average time to get a trial is years.
Oh my
So
God.
there's always going to be a process. So, if you sue somebody as a lawyer, or whether you're a lawyer or not, the other side they're gonna lawyer up, and if they even whether they do or they don't, there's going to be a settlement and a negotiation process that is going to take time and is going to be expensive and costly. So no, I've never sued anybody. I've been a lawyer for 10 years, and I've never, thankfully, have never been in a business dispute where I've had to even consider suing anybody. Knock on wood. But even if I did, suing them would be kind of the last resort. For sure, there's a bit of a flex involved with, you say you're a lawyer, then people treat you a little bit differently. That's not a bad thing, of course, but yeah, the reality is that, and most sophisticated business people will understand that suing is not a great way to achieve the outcome that you want.
Right. And you're very diligent, and you're clear in your contracts, right? I believe not only in securing yourself legally, but also clear contracts that are simple, but that are firm, right? Like, what do you advise when
Mhm.
doing business with people? What kind of mix between legal and clarity are both the same?
Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of contracts are so long and hard to read. Think of the Apple terms of service or that you click through whenever you sign up for some. Nobody ever reads those things because they are hundreds of pages long. It's a joke, right?
And they force
And
you to scroll down and
but
tick the goddamn box.
but they force you to, yeah. And you would never sign it otherwise if they didn't force you to. So it's there's some questionability as to whether it's actually enforceable or not. But yeah, when you are a service provider, a coach, a consultant, selling your services, your time online, I think it's really important to have a contract that is really clear and is really easy to understand, and that you recognize that it's a part of your sales and enrollment mechanisms. It's a sales tool. So if you don't have a contract that reflects your values and reflects how you communicate, then you're doing yourself and your clients a bit of a disservice, and it's actually going to diminish the trust that you're able to build with that person. So yeah, I would encourage you to not to get lost in jargon. And a lot of lawyers struggle with that, with knowing how to draft something in a way that is strong and will set firm boundaries and have clear outcomes. You know, what's going to happen if the contract if one party wants out of the agreement earlier than anticipated, the term provision and other provisions. Those are all really important to think through, but you've got to think through it in a way that's both clear and concise, and is not overly heavy-handed on one side. A lot of times I've seen business owners who, well, they want to strike a deal with somebody else, and then their lawyer comes along and says like, "Oh, let's get this, and this," and like makes it like really aggressive. It's like, what are you doing? You're spoiling the deal.
Fuck up the deal. Yeah, it's like I
Yeah.
believe the best lawyers are also good business people, and most importantly, they understand human psychology, right?
hmm Absolutely. Yeah. Because if you don't understand human psychology in business, then that's a problem. Yeah. And it's particularly so for lawyers because people have a strong perception of what lawyers are. It triggers them in some way. It's like, oh, they're scary, or they're going to be a liar, they're going
This
to be unethical. Like we've got so many representations of lawyers on film and TV, right? And so the lawyer has to understand that you've got to overcome those pieces, yeah, and create some trust with the person that you're working with if you really want to get something done. So
Yeah, in the end, they're advisors. I want to come back to one thing that you said, just that it would take years to get a court hearing date, which is completely ridiculous. Seems
mhm.
the system is completely broken, and we would have thought that since COVID, some of these hearings would happen on Zoom and that there would be efficiency there. Is that throughout Canada? And how would you actually fix that huge problem?
That's a huge question. It's something that the whole profession is grappling with, and there's committees and subcommittees that are trying to address this. And yeah, it is true across Canada that court dates are backed up. You won't find a jurisdiction where it's easy to get one. I mean, the reality is that when you get a court date, you're appearing in front of somebody who's being paid 300, $400,000 a year, and as a civil servant. They're being financed by the government. The, they have courtrooms and technology. Like the whole enterprise is just extremely expensive. And of course, the lawyers for the plaintiff and the defendant, five, six, $700 an hour, all of their staff time, everything. It's insane. So I think it's a very inefficient approach to dispute resolution. Period. Obviously, there are circumstances where, yeah, you absolutely need to have lawyers involved. You need to have a whole judicial system. Obviously, in the criminal context, it's different than in the business resolution context. But I think for most business disputes, they are far better to not be resolved through the court process. Instead, you should be looking at things like mediation, arbitration, negotiation, etc. So there are better ways for business people to resolve their disputes.
Right, barrage of questions coming, but yeah, I had a court case some years ago, sort of lost to various degrees, and I felt the judge wasn't too qualified to judge my case. I think she was
Mm.
smart, but she wasn't fully qualified. Do you think that's an actual problem? One, do you think two, they should use AIs, judges, to make their judgment? And three, do you think that me as a client, instead of hiring a lawyer and lawyering up, do you think I should use an AI instead? Do you think that should be legalized?
Okay, so first question, yes, it is a problem when the person who is judging your trial you're judging your situation isn't familiar with the dynamics. Like if they don't understand business, if they don't understand, I don't know, e-commerce or a specific subdomain, absolutely that is problematic. Then that will just, if nothing else, it's going to increase the cost involved in pursuing the trial because the lawyers on both sides are going to have to invest quite a bit of time in educating the judge on what is actually going on. And the world is so complex now that no judge can be expected to be an expert on everything. And so you might have judges that are, you know, really fluent on IP issues, intellectual property, trademark disputes, things of that nature, or tax disputes, or shareholder disputes, whatever it might be. But there's so many subdomains within just business that it's impossible to have a judge who is fluent in everything. This is one of the reasons why business Delaware is so popular as a place to incorporate because they have a judicial system where there's this huge concentration of business activity within the state of Delaware because everybody incorporates there. And so there's this the judiciary understands business like no other state does. So that makes a lot of sense. In Canada, we don't really have sort of a Delaware equivalent. Not to say that we don't have technically proficient judges, but yeah, it's a problem. So Anyway, your second question was about AI, and should AI be making decisions about, well, I mean, that's up
Or
to,
contributing short term, not making, but contributing.
absolutely. I think they should be contributing for sure. I mean, I use AI every day. Like when I get a client question, but pre-AI, I would look on various online resources. I would Google it. I would look on, of course, the various subscription services that are available to lawyers. There's Westlaw, there's LexisNexis, there's databases, there's Canly. There's all these different services that I can access. And AI isn't perfect, and AI, of course, is not tapped into some of the resource and knowledge databases that it needs to be. But for a specific realm of question, it is going to provide a pretty deep and comprehensive answer. Particularly when you use the deep research function too on chat, it's incredible. Like you can really get quite a detailed analysis. It's often compared to the first year associate or the articling student in a law firm. Previously, like that's what senior lawyers would do. A novel question would come in about something that, requires a bit of research. So they would say, hey, 23-year-old assistant, new baby lawyer, please go run this case down. And then they would come back at you with a 20-page memo, 18 pages of which are junk and just, are irrelevant. But that's just how it is when you have a keener young law student. They just sort of over deliver, right? And it's a little bit like that with ChatGPT deep research, right? Like it'll overdo it, but is going to be some good material in there. And I mean, yeah, to the what we were talking about, like, is there a future role for lawyers? Yes, there is, of course, because you still ultimately need somebody who's going to be able to sort through that information and identify what's really important. And
Yeah.
that's where I think that AI, isn't quite there yet. Maybe it will be in 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. But there's that interface between the human context, the personality dynamics, the practical realities, and all of the information that AI can provide. But absolutely, I encourage my clients to use AI. I don't encourage them to rely upon it exclusively. I think that's very dangerous.
Yeah, we've seen some pretty ridiculous cases of folks that have overused ChatGPT in a court. Pretty disastrous.
Yeah.
I do believe there's a future for lawyers, but maybe the top 1 to 10% ones, and like just like in all professions. Do you think that 80% of lawyers are like B grade nowadays? And do you think with AI they will actually be forced to become A's, or they'll be pretty much jobless?
Yeah, I don't think I don't know. I'm not a technologist. I'm not in the business of sort of forecasting what's going to come about, but I do think that it's going to continue to push lawyers to become more relational. That's the optimist in me. I believe that we all need to become better relators, more adept at reading emotion, at understanding ourselves.
Psychotherapist.
Psychotherapists, yeah, like exactly. We're all going to become armchair therapists, and sort of inquiring about our process and our minds and really understanding how to connect with our clients, because that's the last piece that AI is going to struggle to really do, and that we're going to have the most sort of like ethical and privacy based kind of quandaries and reservations around allowing AI to do. So yeah, I think it's going to push people to do that, and I do already see that in my profession. Like here in British Columbia, I started a small community of lawyers. We've grown to 400 lawyers now, and we're very keen on connecting with each other, talking openly about what's going on in our lives, and just being very open, honest, and vulnerable. I don't think that existed in the profession even 10 years ago. You know, maybe even 5 years ago. But now it's like everybody's talking about like, so has anybody seen a therapist in the group? Like, like that was not a common like. I literally have lawyers who ask me for referrals to therapists and to mechanisms to advance their personal growth, because they're starting to really cue in like, oh, like it's not normal to be stressed. It's not normal to be reaching for alcohol or other substances to numb themselves out. So yeah, I think with AI and technology, it's taken away some of the like really mechanistic things that most people don't want to be doing anyways, and forcing us to focus more on, well, how can we be healthy and happy and good at relating with each other.
And that's Arca, right? Arca Brotherhood that you're talking about?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's definitely one. Yeah, that's one piece of it for sure. So yeah, Arca Brotherhood is a men's community in Vancouver. This is something that I helped run for a few years, and it's a community that in Vancouver has around 400 men in it, and then there's another few hundred around the world that participate online. But the bulk of what Arca is a weekly men's group. So you'll get 10 to 15 guys who will come together, sit in a circle. I actually host one in my apartment in my common room, and yeah, we talk about our lives, talk about everything, talk about relationships, finances, career, sex, money, like just everything under the sun. And it's incredible. It's absolutely changed my life, and I've met some of the greatest guys in the world through it. So very grateful for it.
Yeah, I think communities can be therapy on next level if well orchestrated. Because yeah, the best lawyers are good psychotherapists as well, because it's quite stressful to go through lawsuits, and not only do they provide the tactical solution, but they listen to you and they can provide emotional feedback. And that's not just for lawyers. I think that's the future of doctors as well, right? Like with the
Yeah.
AI taking over, so quite
Well, yeah.
powerful stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, let me give you a sort of a real world example, like the doctor, the lawyer analogy. When you go see a doctor, you've got 15 minutes with them. That's brutal. And the poor doctor, they go in, they look at your chart, they ask
So
you a
hard to be
couple
a
of,
doctor. Suicide
so
rate
hard to be
is
a
really
doctor.
hard.
Ask you like a few like really basic questions. How are you feeling? Like, does it hurt when I do this or something
Like a
like that?
robot.
Yeah, how could you possibly get enough information? But what if instead that person had been able to go to the doctor and get a whole screening, whatever, like have technology do the majority of the diagnostic work. So when the doctor's going in there, they already have like this whole sort of readout on everything. It's the same for lawyers. I do a lot of estate planning, which means that I need to have a really intimate understanding of their entire financial and relational life. So I've got to have the whole family tree, and I have to have the whole financial picture. How do you own everything when you have real estate? Is it in joint tenancy or tenants in commons? Do you have any debts that are outstanding? What kind of business operations are you in? Do you have holding companies and trusts? And it's complex, and particularly when you work with higher net worth individuals who have more going on, the picture is vast, and all of that analytical work takes time. And I've done my training, so I know how to do it, and that's great. But is that the highest and best use of my time when I'm with my client, to be getting sort of lost in like, oh, TFSA versus RRSP and all these pieces? Like, I'm charging them $500 an hour for that, right? What if the AI can sort of go through it and really produce a really good deep snapshot of what kind of recommendations need to make sense, so that when I'm with my client, I can instead focus on explaining why the solution makes sense and what the various other outcomes might be, and really talking through that stuff. It's like, I think that is going to be more valuable for my clients.
And what's the bridge through that problem? Because the problem is that they wouldn't share that info with an AI, right? That it's like, oh,
Yeah,
it's not human. I don't trust it. I think a
that's true. Yeah.
multi-billion, if not trillion-dollar company would just crack the code of having an EQ first AI, like Steve, right? An avatar of you, but that can really generate trust in the person. Hey, this is not the real Steve, but I fully understand your situation. This is fully confidential. Feel free to
Yeah.
sharing that. I think Synthesia is working on that, and 11 Labs as well are working on that. So that's a multi-billion-dollar problem if there could be an AI to just gather that data in a human feeling, an AI that feels like a human, right? And I think that oddly enough, a bunch of AIs can feel more humans than human themselves. That's my contrarian opinion. I think that the reason is that as humans, we have ups and downs, right? With energy, we're not
Hmm.
fully there sometimes, and that AI is like always full power. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. Humans can feel incredibly robotic, and more robotic than the robots. Absolutely. It depends on the level of presence that you're dealing with each individual human. And yeah, I have a relationship with ChatGPT. I call her chat. you can call her like different names, whatever. And I catch myself being like, hey, please, and thank you. And like, I thank you so much, like sort of interacting in a humanistic sort of way with this thing, because it feels better, it sort of feels better as to have that kind of relationship. And I mean, we've all seen things that you've heard about people who are, have full on relationships, right? Like girlfriends, boyfriends, therapists, all that kind of stuff with AI. And it does make sense because AI is like, they I actually did something recently. I actually had like uh, a, a conversation with a friend, and it was we had like this 40-minute conversation, and I uploaded a transcript of it to AI and was like, hey, can you break down the relational dynamics that you see here and some of the ways that we might navigate this conflict? We had a bit of a conflict, and the advice that it gave was just so like grounded and reasonable, and taking into account their side and my side. And so it really is very powerful. It's unreal. People should not underestimate AI. And so but yes, the privacy consideration is a big one, the trust thing, and especially for people in my industry, right? Like I work with estate planning, so that primarily means that my demographic is 45 years old and older. So a lot of my clients are like hard hell no to even sharing a credit card or information through a form, like a Google form or anything like that, or something much more secure than a Google form too. They just won't do anything online, period. And fair enough. We've all heard about Equifax, and like there's been a million data breaches that are out there. So yeah, but the younger generations, of course, are a lot more accustomed to sharing their information.
Yeah, mostly comes from tech illiteracy. I don't think it's a trust issue. It's just that they're so bad with tech that they get scammed. Like I've never been
Yeah,
scammed on my end. It's just
yeah,
like a basic reflex, right, from a kid that grew up behind a screen. And to what you were
yeah,
saying with ChatGPT, yeah, definitely. My wife's a photographer. She had a shitty clients yesterday, and she put her answer through ChatGPT. ChatGPT answered in a very civilized way, and the client was happy right after that. So yeah, I think
yeah.
they have the potential of maybe not being more human, because I think being human is like being imperfect and being angry sometimes and so forth, but
Hmm.
pleasing and being more better flowing than human themselves. So it's quite incredible the age that we're in. Steve, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so my website is parbusinesslaw.com, just like it says on the title card there below. And I've got a YouTube channel, so it's Parr Business Law, Parr Business Law. I've got a few thousand subscribers. I post a ton of legal content on there, and I'm coming out with. I'm always trying to figure out new ways to educate my clients, and educate people about estate planning. Estate planning is something that people get really nervous about because it's confronting mortality, and nobody really wants to think about that, but the reality is that's where we're all going. So let's do it right, and let's do it in a way that's gonna take into account and provide for the next generation as best we can. So
There we go.